Well, let's get started. We've got some people here, and we're going to be talking about some cool stuff today, mainly web application development. We are going to go through this. I'm going to see if we can keep it real short today, maybe do 45 minutes. We'll see. I have a lot of really cool stuff to talk about today. But we have everyone here for an hour. So if anybody has any questions, going to ask that you throw it in the QA or throw it in the chat in general, and we can have some interesting responses. We've got a couple of people here who can answer questions other than myself. So if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to them. Today in the panel here, although I'll have to admit, I kind of like to do the talking, so I'm probably the guy doing most of the talking today. We have Troy, Jamie, Taylor, and myself. If you're looking for growth, you're going to Troy. If you're looking for ERP implementation, you're going to Jamie. If you're looking for just ideas about marketing, you're going to Taylor. And you're welcome to call me anytime. I love a good call. So today we're going to focus on the very center of our theory, which is web applications. What are they? You know, my favorite web application, the one that I pretty much use every minute of the day, is Google Sheets. I am pretty much always on a Google Sheet. When I mean that, I always have at least one open on my computer, sometimes 50, to the point where my computer crashes and I have to, restart opening them again from scratch. But what it is instead of having a document, an Excel document, which used to be the way the world worked, now and you can obviously now do this with Excel, but I still use Google because I like it. But now everyone can collaborate on the same Excel document at the same time. And in fact, that is where most of the ideas start for web applications, where even we recommend you start, is find an Excel document, find a Google Sheet that you are using for your whole organization. And now you've got other problems: access, restrictions, security, the fact that Google Sheets might die one day and your whole company falls down. That's not a safe place to be. So the reality is Google Sheets as a web application, meaning it's an internet application that I can go to on a browser, and so can other people. That's what makes it. Maybe a cloud application might be a better word for it, in fact. Another example, one that I use constantly, is Salesforce. Our whole sales team uses Salesforce. Everyone's collaborating, showing stuff. There's data coming out. Now, of course, these are platforms that you as an organization can use, but they are a web application. But everybody, it's sort of multi-tenanted, meaning everybody comes in and everyone uses it at the same time. Now, that has all sorts, we're not going to get into it today, compliance issues, etc., but that is the truth. Another one we use a lot is called Rike. This is our project management. All of our projects run through this mechanism. It's online. Everyone logs in, shows where they are with each project, does other things to manage where they are. Another one that all of our developers use is called GitHub. This is where all of our code sits. All the code sits on this. We actually have an internal GitHub and an external GitHub. And what this does is everyone can collaborate now with all of their things and go online and see what files are there, etc., through this meaningful thing. And I want to add one, which I just started working with over the last week, and I'm so in love with it. So you know how you have that like love of the day. I have no idea whether I'm going to love it next week or not, but I have a problem with most of our flow charts, everything from how we move through the company in terms of employees getting moving forward, in terms of what the hierarchies look like, in terms of our processes. I've been using a mechanism called OmniGraffle. There's a whole bunch out there, but it's just a computer program. So then I go share that with somebody, and then they go share it, and then I've lost the collaboration, and then I don't know what version the document is. This is a great, great place for doing that kind of work that I've just discovered and I'm in love with. It is a cool web application. Now, there's a lot of confusion, and I have had this over the last 25 years of building these things, of the difference between a marketing website and a web application. That's why we call it a web application. Marketing websites are about communicating outwards, and web applications are about efficiency and other things. Now, the catch is sometimes it's the same thing. Sometimes your marketing website is also a web application. In fact, we build tons of little modules that go onto websites, and we could talk about that, but that's not a standalone system that only does things for a purpose. And in fact, in many cases, only that it's sort of a hub or a portal, which is another word we sort of internally use, portal versus a marketing website. So your marketing website might link to it, your clients might go into it, but it is a standalone thing that does its own thing. So that's the difference as I see it. Is the communication part of your website is kind of your website, and the efficiency collaboration tool set is about web applications. That's the difference. And this is where we start thinking about what would be a great web application. Like, where could we find efficiency to make things easier for people? Where could we actually save people money? Where could we collaborate, get people working on the same thing at the same time without writing over one another? Where do we need better information coming out the back end, stats that are clear, that are standardized, so we see them over a long period of time? And where could we create a better experience for the people who work with us and or our clients? So that's where web applications really start to shine, these opportunities that otherwise don't exist. So why custom? Why build your own? I'm going to give you some examples today of systems that we've built over the last 100 years, since the website, the internet existed, that solved a specific problem or found something really neat. And we just built so many cool things. I want to show you guys, instead of just telling you and giving you bullets, I'm going to show you. So one example is a system we built for Harley Davidson. So the issue here that they had was they have all these pictures of Harley Davidsons that they use for their marketing. And the problem is that obviously they need the right to use it at any given moment. And of course, somebody goes to do a news article or go to an ad or go to a billboard in the marketing, and so their marketing agency would use an image. Of course, then someone would sue them for using the wrong image the wrong time, because all of these images have rights and licensing and specificities as to when and where and how many times it can be used. So what we did is built an entire system that would manage for every single one of their motorcycles. They could put in all their keywords and say, this is available at this time, you can use it under these restrictions, etc. And that gave people very specific permissions. You couldn't do that with a standard application off the shelf. Another example that we built is for GE, where we actually built a system that would pull in, and they had a core issue, which is when one of their technicians was out fixing a washing machine or a refrigerator, they would actually call in and say, look, I'm missing this part or this thing. And the internal team, which was fairly large at the time, would have to go digging through all these databases, find all this information and get back to them. And the problem was you had databases in Mexico, databases in Japan, databases all over the place in the United States, all of the history and everything behind it. And so we actually created a system that would reach out to all of those different data sources, pull in all the parts explosions, pull in all the information, and then allow collaboration and insights and people sharing information. In fact, we built this, I think, 12 years ago. It's still the backbone of technical support for GE in North America. But that allows that thing, you can't do that with Google Sheets, can't do that with Excel, pull all that data externally. Another example would be, and I just love this example, I want to clarify, Blockbuster going bankrupt was not our fault. We came in 2009, end of 2009, because they were really struggling and nobody wanted to put their hands near them. And we actually built a system that would pull in all of their different videos on what was able to rent, and started showing people what they had rented, what they could rent, et cetera, and they were just trying to sort of fix their rental experience. And it was fascinating. We built this really neat system, but of course, Netflix and the changes that were happening got ahead of them, and they lost on a larger business issue. But what I did like about this is the millions and millions and millions and millions of records of people and millions, all the different stuff. Now, we have another example I'm thinking of is we did work for a local hospital, and they had an Excel document. Now, Excel can handle about 1/3 of a million rows, and then it just starts to grind. When I mean grind, you try to put a new thing in it, and you can see the document sort of jittering, trying to open it up. And so we move all of that onto server infrastructure, and we actually put things in a way that the data can be harnessed and used much more quickly. Then we don't have those issues with large documents and large data sets. So another example would be control. So we built a system for 3M. And the idea is that they have people all over selling 3M products, and they need to control how their leads and where their leads were going. So we built a centralized mechanism that pull all their leads in, send back up to their CRM, so they can monitor and understand what's coming in and make sure the leads get handled correctly. And if they don't get handled, pass them to somebody else, deal with something else. So we built that entire sort of management system. Now, Salesforce and other CRMs can't do things that way. They're built in a very structured way, and you have to do things Salesforce way if you want Salesforce to do it. So you have to build an external system that does something. It can be a plugin for Salesforce, or it can be a portal that allows people to come in and manage things. Another example was for a First Nations group in actually the most northern First Nations group in the world, which is the Gwich'in. And I ended up in Inuvik actually, working with the system. And the issue here was they had a lot of paper, and that paper was all over the place. And sometimes paper got missed, and people wouldn't get literally their due from the Canadian government. So we built a centralized system that would allow people using GPS tracking to know when exactly they were and their entire histories of each person. And that system is still up and alive today. Another example would be that one of the problems and one of the benefits of a web application is you want your client to be able to log in and just see what they're allowed to see. And you can't do that with your standard application. There's obviously security issues. You don't want to give people access to a Google Doc. You don't want to access people to access your ERP, or if you do, they have very specific, things that you want to do. In this case, we created this amazing experience, and we helped grow a company from a few $1 million in revenue to $100 million in revenue, and just how the pieces all fit together. Another thing that you can do with web applications. So we built a system that actually manages, I'm going to say half of the universities in North America with the card systems that kids use to go around and buy a beer or get into their dormitory or other things. And the issue here was they had all sorts of different physical systems that needed access to that central card. Now, what was happening before is they were just literally using a central database and things were happening, but then there was no access to that system. If you had a problem with your card, you had to go drive into something. If you wanted to add money to it, you had to call in. Like, there was no external access. So we got access out to the people on the road. We got access from the web all the way into that database. We got access to mobile devices. We allowed people from all over the world to be able to log in and manage the rights and privileges of what they're doing. So again, externally managing it. Another one, we actually just did this, and obviously in the last month, was we have a training company we work with, and they were asked by external organization to identify a certification for people who are working with COVID or who are going to be frontline staff with COVID. So we actually built a system quickly that would allow and maintain the certification history of every single person who's trained under this. And in fact, you can go to COVID Safety Ambassadors right now and get your team trained on COVID as if it was something else. And here's the thing, is that certification obviously has historical documentation that needs to be associated with it, so that if there's ever a problem in the future where you go into a mall and somebody gets COVID and it explodes, and there's going to be obviously also some legal issues around that now you can have a certified person come in, and there is a data trail of everything that's happened in history around that certification. And so that's also something really important, is can we manage all that history and make sure that people have it coming. Another example around the sort of encryption and security is we actually built a system for a UK-based military tax reclaim specialist. So this is the largest reclaims tax specialist. So people who are in the military have to drive different places and do different things, and they have to obviously go back and make sure that their people in higher command validate that that is a military thing, not a personal thing, and then that is obviously affects your taxes. And the problem is people would go do that, they'd lose their receipt, they'd lose all the information. So we built that centralized mechanism that would pull all that in, and of course the encryption and security implications of that are huge. In order to be accountable, to make sure everything is hard encrypted, cannot be taken back out, because literally we're influencing military and people's lives, and they are at stake. Another cool thing that we did recently, and this is sort of standard data output. So this is the 5 personas benchmark for shift facilitation. And what this does is it allows people who are interested to go and do an online psychological profile of themselves. So, and what comes up the other end is a certification saying, I am actually, yes, I am certified this type of persona. Here's how I should sell. Here's how I should act. Here's how I should get training. Here's how I should train in the future. And of course, that is a very, very custom process, custom journey that cannot be accomplished through your standard application. Just something really cool, really cool. Another thing is, of course, I want all my people to be able to go on the road. And one of the problems is that if you're using sort of the ERPs or the system that you have, just using their external system would be difficult, maybe impossible to use. So you can create custom very specific experiences for very specific types of people. If this person logs in, they only get one thing. If that person logs in, they get a whole bunch of different things. So those applications, that competency is critical. And speaking to those multiple roles, sometimes those roles have to be so limited in their access. So we built something for the court system of a Spanish-speaking country, I won't say which, and their whole court system comes in and uses our systems, comes in to check whether they're allowed to access information, whether they can get to it or not. And we don't want to be leaking anything to anybody. I'm showing you a couple of login pages of hundreds of different experiences that we had to build. Judges get this, criminals get this, that everybody gets different pieces when they come in, and you don't want anyone to know where the other person is logging in or what it is they're doing. So that multiple role thing can be very, very hyper customized in this way. And along that hyper customization, that simplicity. So we built a really cool system for bathways. So they do bathtub cuts. So if you've got somebody with a bathtub and they're in an aging demographic and they can no longer get their leg up and over their bathtub, instead of completely renovating your bathroom, you can have Bathway come in and put in a little door that allows you to still use it as a bathtub if you wish, but you can also just get into it really easily. And the thing is that now you're managing people across North America, and these are technicians who don't want to use technology at all, but we created very, very simple online system for them to log in. When an order happens in Chicago, they can simply access Chicago, tell them to go do it, etc. Something that is very difficult. You don't want to be training all your external staff on something that they just need to log in and click one button on. This is also relevant for the people who are watching what's going on, is the importance of custom outputs. So custom graphing, custom where are we in a process. When you're using, say, a Salesforce, you're kind of stuck to their stuff, or you export it and fiddle with it in Excel again to get the output that you need. If you are, in fact, looking at a standard output every single day, we can customize. We can make that standard output, whether it's on a PDF or whether it's on the web, whether it's live or whether you want to bake it, and make sure that output's consistent. So same thing, really cool company called UCurve, and what they do is they actually identify during change management where all the team members are on your team during that change and show it to you in a custom output. Another cool thing is the security aspect. So we built a really cool system. I can't even tell you for whom. I can't show you many of the pages. We sort of internally named it Polywog, because we're Treefrog, of course. And this is a politician management system for a major politician. So we allowed that politician to manage all of the voting of all the people, who was on their side, who wasn't, what they had to say, what they didn't have to say, centralized all that information in one place so that they could manage. And I will note they did win multiple times and have continued to grow. But the catch is there, of course, the security implications of this. You couldn't have this in a Google Doc that by mistake got shared. That would be a complete disaster. The other thing here is around structured collaboration. So if I want, we built a really cool system called Blue World. What this does is it allows you to actually collaborate on systems. It's actually very similar to Whimsical. Whimsical is about direction. This is about layout and actually prototyping of web applications. So now you've got multiple people can all log in, move stuff around, and click export, and it will automatically turn it into a website. So this ability to, and I will note, Shopify can't do this. Yeah, they're a billion-dollar organization, or many, many billions. But in fact, if two people log into Shopify at the same time, boom, the thing explodes. And in this case, you want multiple people to be able to log in, do things, make changes, and keep going. Another cool thing is actually bring external information in. So you can do this, it's just very difficult. But we built a system for a door management company. So they manage all of the sliding doors on hospitals, Walmarts, etc. You know, where you walk up to a door and it opens and it closes. Well, there's a ton of data around whether that's appropriate or not, and they must be inspected on a regular basis. So what we can do is actually externally pull sensor information and tell you whether that inspection needs to happen or not. So that external inputs, which you can't easily drop into a system that isn't custom, this is something that a web application can allow you to do that other things can't. Another thing would be tracking information. So we built a really cool system for tracking QR codes and RFID, actually NFC, which is little tapping cards. So if you tap your Apple phone on something, so we can actually grab that information from a cell phone, from other things like a barcode scanner, and pull that information into a web application to track everything. That is very, very difficult to do with Salesforce. Basically impossible. So anything you want to do custom, you have to sort of customize that into an ERP. We can actually customize, grab that information, drop it in the site, and show you exactly what it looks like. So you can track items, you can track products, you can track people, you can track all sorts of cool stuff. And today, I'm not getting into IoT or other stuff because we're having other web discussions about that. And I just wanted to go through some of the cool systems that we've built to give people some ideas, some really cool ideas of problems that we could solve. There's obviously as well the ability to build mobile applications, but because we are literally giving a webinar on that soon, I didn't want to steal my own fire. But the ability to build mobile applications on top of those web applications that have specific experiences is obviously core to what it is that we do. I wanted to have some fun today and show you guys some of the systems that we built to manage our own organization. Now, since we built these, a lot of other competitors have shown up, which is fine. We keep looking at the competitors and going, okay, we could do that. We know that, for example, a system we built, which we internally just call the talent system. Now, the talent system is basically, we send everyone to treefrog.ca/jobs. If you want a job at Treefrog, you go to that and you fill out a form, a bunch of questions, pick the job you want to apply for, and then actually do a video interview right there and then. And then that video interview is sent back to administration section, where we've had 13,000 people fill this out. Not everyone's done a video, but the large majority of them have. And you can actually go in and see the people that have applied for every single role. Now, why this is great is not only do you have access now to the resume, to LinkedIn, and to a bunch of meaningful questions, but you also have access to video. Now, there are now companies that we started this, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. There's now a bunch of companies that do this, like Bamboo HR. But Bamboo HR is going to cost you, I don't know, a couple of $1,000 a month if you're a large enough organization. Even if it's 1,000, we could build this system for, I don't know, a year's worth of value, and then you don't have to pay for it ongoing. So, or other than technological infrastructure. So if there's external systems that cost you a lot of money, we can actually probably simplify that, build a custom one, do it exactly the way you want. And even if you only do that for 3 or 4 or 5 years, you can get an awesome return on investment and then go back to the other system again. Another cool system we built, same idea, lots of time tracking systems out there. But we built ourselves an internal time tracking system because none of the external systems had the competence that we wanted it to have. So this allows every single person at Treefrog, everyone in our panel knows it well, to go in and select the project they're working on, select the skills that they're using, and we, out the other end, know exactly how many minutes, in fact, how many seconds, every single person's worked on every single project. And so many time trackers out there work in different ways, but this gives us utilization information. We can say we know how many hours people have worked, how many they've worked on internal stuff on each project. And this gives us obviously the ability to bill properly, ability to do all sorts of other cool things. So in fact, we keep on looking at other time tracking systems and going, wow, those are cool, but they still don't do exactly what we want it to do internally. So something very cool you can use the web for. Another really cool system that we keep upgrading and improving over and over again is a proposal system. So today, you could go to treefrog.ca, click on Instant Web Quote, pick a website that sort of size, type that you'd like, click a button on it, fill out a form, and you will get a PDF proposal, beautifully formatted with your name on it, delivered to your inbox. Not only that, but once it's delivered to your inbox, it actually goes into our CRM, into Salesforce, and also into our own backend system, and we can monitor whether you opened it or not. So now we've got this custom proposal, and now the salesperson can go in, add, just like a deck of cards, add pages to the proposal, remove things, add things quickly, manage that proposal. So I'm doing a custom proposal for our client for artificial intelligence this week, which is very specific because it's for IRAP, a grant organization, and they want exactly this format and proposal. And it's been 2 weeks of me banging my head against a Word document. That cripples your sales force from being able to send proposals out quickly. In our case, if somebody wants to make a proposal, they go in, they go boom, 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 they click a button and they fire out a proposal. And that takes a matter of minutes instead of a matter of weeks. So that's a really, and you can change different things in that proposal, add pages, move pages around. And obviously we're actually right now, we're building in multiple complex templates so you can actually have multiple sets of pricing in the same document. And of course they look super pretty, super consistent. And every single page actually has a barcode on it. So we know exactly what time, what person, and when every single page came from. So if I find a proposal page in my recycling bin, which is against the Canadian privacy law, I can pull it out and go, okay, somebody threw this out in the wrong place. I can actually figure out who it was very easily from just scanning it with my phone. And we've done now with this system, which has been around for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, about $58 million in proposals through this system, just through some standardized templates. Boom, 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 boom. I worked out this morning. Another cool thing, another problem that we had, so chronic problem we had was who's on holiday, when they on holiday, what's going on. And of course, this is classically managed through Excel, and that makes it very difficult. So I just built a really quick system to solve this problem. This problem has a centralized calendar where anybody can go on, they can say, yes, this is when everybody's gone, this is when special holidays are, this is when there's corporate events or Treefrog events that we want to make sure people are on. I can go in and it will count the number of holiday days I have, when I have it, and so our controller goes in, makes sure everybody's holidays are properly accommodated for, and that allows us, any person at Treefrog, to book their holiday, sends an email out to their direct report. The direct report can just yay or nay it, and have a conversation, but allows really quick management of holidays from a centralized resource. Again, there are all sorts of HR systems out there that charge $150 a head. So, you know what, we're closing 40 people, multiply it by 150, there's a lot of savings in that for us by just building a quick system to solve that one issue that, you know, is critical to us. Well, another cool thing that we built, and this is actually based on a very famous book called CEO Tools by Craig Kramers. And what CEO Tools was, one of the chapters was about making sure that you're constantly asking people in the whole organization if they're in a good place or not. And so you can just sort of leave it and ignore it, or you can, which is also a strategy, or you can ask everybody every month, are you good? Are you good with this? Are you good with this? Are you good with this? Now, some people aren't in a place where they want to answer it if they're good or bad, but at least we're asking the question so we can solve the problem, or at least start to communicate about a problem and see it before it happens. So this allows us to monitor employee satisfaction. It's called the Employee Satisfaction Index. And what we do is we send an email out once a month that has some smiley faces on it around some specific things out of this book: communication, appreciation, convenience, challenge, personal growth, etc. And we simply ask the question, look at all the stats, and come back and see if there's anyone who's really had a challenge that we missed. For example, someone might really be feeling like they're being underpaid. Somebody might really be feeling like they haven't been challenged in a while, or that they actually just moved and or there's construction and their convenience aspect has changed. And we can actually address that as leadership more quickly than if we just sort of waited for them to, you know, quit, which is a terrible option. So really cool system we built really quickly. Again, web application that we could do stuff. Another thing we built, which is really cool, is a sales wiki. So this is the ability for all salespeople to put in information. It's a wiki, so any salesperson go in and make changes. So this has the entire history of our sort of sales history of how and what objections and common things happen. And this sort of a cool idea where we centralize information. And again, you can use a standard wiki, which actually it basically is, but we've hyper customized this wiki as a web application so everyone can collaborate in the sales team. So those are all web applications. I'm not sure if anybody has any question, but those are all systems that solve problems by using the internet, which it can do, which other systems couldn't. So collaboration, communication, effectiveness, structure, all the things that we just talked about, all things that we can do using internet applications that you otherwise couldn't. Let's talk about this. So you have a problem. I bet you if you think about it as a business for a few minutes, you'll realize there is a thing that keeps you up at night. It is a thing that drives you crazy. It is a thing, or it's a thing that costs you thousands of dollars by not getting it right, or costs you thousands of dollars because you're paying somebody else thousands of dollars to do that. We could save that money by pulling in and using a different process. So here's how you go about fixing that problem. Now, the first thing is, and I love talking about this guy, he's my favorite guy, Charles Vygotsky, Lev Vygotsky. So he is a behavioral cognitive scientist, sort of similar to Sigmund Freud, but in fact was from the sort of Russian part of the world, as opposed to, I'm probably insulting him. I'm not sure whether he's Ukrainian or Russian or where it came from, but he was Eastern as opposed to Western thought. Now, what he said is that if you have a couple of people in a room and they both, they use the word apple, one person's version of what apple is not the same version of the other person's version of apple. In fact, they have completely different experiences that have brought them towards that understanding. So when two people say, hey, I've got an idea of how I'm going to solve this problem, they're kind of roughly talking about an apple, but in fact, he used the example of it's like an apple, but it's got a sheet over it. And one person who really understands the complete history of farming and apples will really have a deep understanding of all the potential implications of that. The other person who's only ever bought or eaten an apple once that they bought in downtown Toronto has a much less conceptual understanding of what that is. So them coming to terms with what that is actually one of the biggest problems in building a web application. And in fact, we all think differently. We all approach life differently. And so one person's expectation of how web application is built is much different than another's. So this is the process of getting, somebody has an idea, they recognize a problem, and we're trying to solve that problem for real with a web application. How do we get there? How do we get to the fully conceptualized idea? This is how. The first is know your problem. Don't just build something for the sake of building it, but know what the problem is, really deeply understand where the value is, where the return on investment is, and lead with that. So building a system for fun, which people come to all and like, oh, they're excited, they want to build a thing. I'm always like, oh, this is going to go badly. Not always, but in many cases where I'm thinking they just want to build for fun. They haven't solved a real problem. They've identified the problem up front. This is the value that we're trying to get to, and keep that in at the point on the horizon. Make sure you're constantly looking at it throughout the rest of the process. Once I figured out what that problem is, then the question is, how do I solve that? And my favorite way, ideation, is to actually sit down with some busted old napkins and a Sharpie, or what's even better is if it sort of draw out the problem. What's even better for me is drawing out, figuring out, writing notes, and ultimately ending up on a whiteboard. So if you come to Treefrog, like I can't live. I actually have a whiteboard behind me here. I just couldn't be far away from a whiteboard because I can't think about things. It's not just to haphazardly think about it is useless. You have to actually sit down and start writing the things out. And Vygotsky's point was they have to like a pensieve from Harry Potter. You have to pull them out of your head and write them down on paper, or they're not real. And when you start writing them down on paper, they start forming into something real that other people can understand. And even people have different understandings of what words mean. So understanding what each one of those words and drawing it out and saying this will go to this and then this will happen. And another person who understands the problem can look at that and say, yeah, that's not going to work, because what about this and how about that and why won't these things work? So that's why you'll see me, and if you go to Treefrog, all these giant whiteboards are always covered in information from people on our team, because we're trying to get that stuff out onto paper, onto whiteboard, onto anything, and collaborate and work together to solve the problem. Now, I also say once you've done that, don't immediately start building. This is why my favorite is if you've got a system that's inside Excel or inside Google Docs or something to that effect, we can take that system and improve on it and build it. But if you're just trying to solve a problem, don't immediately start building. Go work it out with Google Sheets. Go work it out on paper first. Go make it happen. And it doesn't need to be long. You don't have to do this for months. You do this literally just once. We're going to run the employee satisfaction index. For example, When I saw that in that book, I'm like, oh yeah, that's gonna be great. And he said, write it all down on paper, collaborate on paper, and at the end, you got all these paper things on your desk. I'm like, this is crazy. But first, I started doing it on paper, and I immediately realized this was going to happen, that was going to happen. And then I started putting it in Excel. And once I had an Excel, then I moved it to making a custom system out of it, so it would manage all the security, have automatic graphing, and be able to still be used easily 5 years later without not a lot of cost of administration. So once the system works, then we also got to think what our client profiles are. And this is actually something that we do as part of branding, as part of website development. We have to figure out who are the people that are using it. If we're trying to get external clients to use the system, we really got to know who they are, or we're going to fail. So where do they spend their time? How do they use things? Are they good with computers? Are they bad with computers? And then work through an entire journey of what that process, what that system is going to look like. So that entire user experience, starting from the beginning and working all the way through, needs to be thought through meaningfully. Then once I've got that journey, once I figure out what that looks like, then I can go scope the project. And this actually, Vygotsky's theory of the fully conceptualized idea, this is the most important part, is making sure that you work through the details of how it's going to work, like I keep saying. And the thing is, if I just have an idea and I want to solve it, and everybody what's it, then it could possibly cost up to 4 times what the original estimate is. It could also cost a quarter less, but trust me, it never does, or 75%, it never does. And what happens is that everybody says, yeah, let's go make a system, and then you start building, and then you start changing, and then you start twisting, and then you realize it didn't do what you're supposed to do. So what you do is you sit down and figure out as much as you possibly can. And the more you do that, the less you reduce cost. Obviously, until the point that the system is finished, you don't know what the cost is going to be. I'll also note that the sort of standard process that people do when they try and make a system is they try and build the whole thing all at once, giant system. This is obviously, there are some things that have to be built, like design, aesthetics, etc. There is a big front investment. But if you try and build something perfect before it goes live, it's called the waterfall development process. You start at the top and you build every last thing until you get to the end. The cost of that process will be immense. And when it finally gets out, because you haven't considered any of the changes, any of the inputs, any of the problems, you haven't actually started to use it yet. It's sort of like a new car or a new anything. You really don't know where it's going to end up. The better way to do it is to actually figure out the absolute, we call minimum viable product, the absolute minimum thing that you could use, get there, realize the things that you really need to make it much better. I call this minimum marketable product. Get to the minimum marketable product, and then start adding features as it makes sense until you get to that fully realized vision. So now I'm saying that's as if it's 3 stages. It's not 3 stages. And this is actually why the concept of agile exists, which is get to something that can create value for you. So for example, when I built that employee satisfaction index, or when you built the proposal machine, I went, look, all we got to do is get it to make one kind of proposal. Just get it one thing. Let's just take the biggest problem off of our deck. Boom, we got that problem solved. Okay, now we can go and start solving other problems, making it more complex, to having it do other things. Because we had the big idea, because we thought about the big process around it, we can actually make sure that we don't screw ourselves, or we can accept the fact that we're going to throw out the first thing we build, which is a perfectly valid thought process. Not every piece of code ever written has to work every single time. Solve one problem, figure out what it is, then go solve it next. And if you have that mentality, you're going to get faster, you're going to get way more return on investment. The other thing you got to consider is what external things you could use to save you money. There's a couple of problems with this. So for example, if you want mapping in your system, you would use Google Maps. You might use Apple Maps, maybe use another one, but let's say you use mapping software. Now, one of the benefits of that is it saves you building an entire mapping thing. One of the problems with that is that they have limitations on how much you can use them, when you can use them, whether you can save it, whether you can, copy and paste images. So you got to really understand what those external integrations allow you or don't allow you to do. What's also is Google Maps has changed their technology about 8 times since we started using it. They changed their rights and privileges about 20 times since you started using it. And that's the case with everybody. So as soon as you start inheriting external third-party things, you save yourself a whole bunch of money up front, but you gotta know that the red-headed stepchildren that you've invited into your house are gonna cause you ongoing maintenance things that you gotta be considering. So that's just something to consider as you're building. Now, what we do at Treefrog is now you've come up with this idea, you've written everything out, you've figured out how you're gonna build and how you can get to that next thing. Now we sit you down with a project manager, a development person, and a UX person, and we draw out what the big image is. You know, in the old days, we would have used whiteboards. With COVID, we're using different technologies to accomplish the same tasks. Oh, you've gotta get that big vision drawn out, and everyone's gotta be on the same page of understanding. And whether that's, you know, using internal systems, defining where things go and how things happen, you are documenting everything you possibly can to get to where you want to go. Then you go through a process, and this is the sort of key process that gets everybody to the same page. It's called, we call it PERT process. It is industry standard. I have no idea what PERT stands for because the project manager isn't here. We need somebody to go look that up. Anyway, the idea here is simple. I go through the requirements, every single thing that the system needs to do. So I've had all this fun figuring out what all the pieces look like. Now I got to go, there's a button that allows me to log in. Is there a change password button? Is there a forgot password button? Are we using two-factor authentication? You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those little pieces. There's I've got a great presentation I could give for an hour on choosing a date. I mean, something as simple as a date seems simplistic, but actually you could have a field that just has a date, literally just a field, and you just type something in, it's text. If you actually want to sort things on a date later though, you've got to make sure you handle that date appropriately. Maybe it's month, day, and year. Then you realize, wait a second, there's actually multiple time zones. That now I've got to deal with time zones and timing. There's actually multiple different calendaring systems and problems where one date is in front of the other. There are certain days that are to be avoided. There are so many unbelievable consequences to how I accept dates or don't accept dates into my system. You've got to sort of figure out what is important, where that is, and make sure that that's drawn out so everybody has the same list of expectations. And what we do is we look at that, how long it's going to take to build a date system, and we go, okay, it probably should take about this amount of time. That's if, you know, if everything is working well. If the birds are singing and the babies are smiling, then actually it could take a lot less time, and it'll take this much time. But if everything goes wrong, if everything turns horrible, it's going to take this long. Now, some things, like I'm going to type this paragraph out into Word, well, it's going to take, worst case scenario is going to take an hour. Best case scenario, probably an hour. You know, unbelievable case going to take an hour. No big deal. There's not a lot of risk in that. It's pretty straightforward. But in another thing where I'm using an unknown technology that says that it connects the way it should, but it doesn't actually connect that way, and that technology has never been used before in that specific use case scenario, then the risk is incredibly high. So we've got to identify where those risky areas are. And usually when you go through the developer, and they'll figure out, look, this is risky, this isn't risky. And then you can decide, do we really, really need mapping right now? Because that's such a risk, it's going to inflate artificially the cost. We could actually build the core stuff faster, cheaper now. And then this PERT process allows us to identify where the biggest areas are that could potentially inflate cost and get rid of them. And then we don't have frustration. We can execute a project much quicker, much better, because we're all on the same page about what it is. So then what we've got is we've got this scope, which is an example of, here are all the different things. Here's critical, here's not critical. This is what the cost would be for the, say, phase 1, phase 2, development, design, et cetera. We can go through with a Sharpie and say, we want this, we don't want this. Is there a way that we can drive this down, or is there a way we can drive it up? And then we also come up with a list of expectations. So get that Vygotskian theory out of our system. We accept this is what it's going to do, this is what it's not going to do. Here's the risky areas, here's the non-risky areas. Here's the things that we are not going to do. And we come up with a comprehensive scope, and we all agree that's what needs to happen to get you to that first dollar back, that first return on investment. Once we know that, we can go plan it. You can have a project manager, put it all together and say, I can build this, I can build that, I can build this, I can build this, remove all of the risk out of that. And then we get started, we get building. So now we get to wireframe. So the first thing is and depends on how complex the system is. Sometimes you can move right to design, but often it makes sense to wireframe, figure out how are the buttons all going to fit, how are they all going to go in one place. Once you wireframe it, then you can go take a graphic designer, make it look pretty. If you build a system and use a programmer exclusively and you don't use a designer, your user experience is going to suck. No, everyone's going to hate your system and nobody's going to use it. And you don't want that. You want your system to get used in order to get your return on investment for it. So actually using graphics and using aesthetics can really genuinely help the user experience. Get rid of some of the unused stuff into, settings or advanced and other things, and keep it simple for the end user. Then once you've designed it, you go through a process, we call it puppeting. There's a great thing out there, it's called Envision. And in fact, this is similar to the product that we built in the past. And what it does is it allows you to say, look, this link, this section goes to this section goes to this, and you can quickly make a product work without building all the databases, making all the buttons work, doing all the programming. The benefit of this, you don't need to do it for everything, but you do it for enough of the system that you can then take it and put it in front of users, show people how it's going to work. And then the users can look at it and say, yeah, I'm never going to use this because of this. And then you can fix that before you spent all your money on something that won't get used. Again, you can skip this, or you can actually make this the goal of the project. In many cases, so we'll build a system to Puppet, take the Puppet to end users, and try and get investment to go back and rebuild that system. So we've done that dozens of times. We're actually building puppets, not building systems for people. Then you got to choose the technology, and the reality is what technology you should use should not be dependent on the programmers that you have. It should be dependent on the goal of the project. And so if you are working with a team who is not platform agnostic, if they only know one thing, man, I have seen companies try and shove everything into their given product. Listen, every company that sells a product is trying to shove stuff into their system. That is not the case with Treefrog. We just pick the best product in every single case for everything. In fact, sometimes we'll even say, and this happened this year, huge project, huge opportunity for us. And we said, we're not good at Microsoft technologies in particular .NET and C#. This is your back end is C#, your front end is C#. We should not be doing this for you. You should be going and finding an organization, and here's a recommendation of who could do it better for you. And that's the case, the best technology that you can find. The next thing, which is really important along the same line, is how you're going to host it, what the infrastructure looks like. Many times in my experience, we've had people who believe that they can host their application on GoDaddy for $5 a month. Now, GoDaddy, they warranty nothing. If your whole system gets erased and disappears, their answer is, you're paying $5 a month. What do you want? And actually, this is where the rubber hits the road on your application. If this becomes a business critical application or something that brings you a lot of return on investment, you need to make sure that you have a proper infrastructure behind it. And the core answer, the thing that drives this whole thing, is how much time can you afford for it to not be up and not be running. So if you say 99% uptime, that means you're down 3 days a year. Is that okay? We've had people, so some of the systems that we just built, I'll make an example of, where if they were down for 5 or 10 minutes, they have people whose their lives depend on the system that our client built for them. And they obviously are incredibly emotional if a system is not working, and it can ruin the client experience of being down for a few minutes. And suddenly we're building servers that can take over from servers in microseconds and manage the transactional inputs. And then we have multiple locations, one in Vancouver, one in Berlin, one in Australia, servers everywhere that are interconnecting and changing transactions so that everyone stays up. You can say 100% of the time. That's not even a realistic goal. Twitter, Facebook, Google, Amazon all went down this year. That's a goal. It's never a guaranteed achievement. But you can get farther and farther towards making sure that if there's a blip, if a server goes down, it's not a problem because they're just servers go down. That happens. We can create infrastructure that actually, if one server goes down or if a whole group of servers go down, we're still on board. So then after you've figured all that stuff out, now you go build it. And here's the building part this is the frustrating and difficult part is the developers disappear and go off into a box and go start building stuff. And for a few weeks or a month, everyone's sort of sitting there biting their fingernails, wondering what's happening. and then boom, you get your first version back. When you get your first version back, you've got to figure out how deeply am I going to QA it? Is it going to work on every browser? Is it going to work on every mobile device? How far am I going to go? The project we're working this week, we said, you know what? If it works on one browser, because it's literally just some text, probably good enough. But actually, because of the agency that we're working with, they said, nope, I want guaranteed for it to work on all the major browsers. And we sort of said, look, there's 2,000 current browsers, 2,000 plus. I think there's 2,400 active browsers in the world. If you think of all the possible phones, all the possible browsers, and all the possible devices, we would recommend you make it work on the core, say 12. And if it works in the core 12, you're probably good enough. Or if you're government, I was talking to, probably shouldn't say this, but I was talking to the person who runs Canada.ca, and their limitations are unbelievable because every possible Canadian needs access to that site. They can't do anything. You can't use color, you can't use pictures, you can't use things bigger than this. And you go to that website and you're like, this is terrible. Like, what? This is terrible. And the reason for that is that they've got limitations because of browsers. So anyway, QA is a core important. Now I get to deploy it and I'm done. You're not done. You have not successfully implemented a web application because you have not got buy-in from the people who are actually using it. And listen, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I could go deep into this, but I'm just going to say this. I've got this theory, it's called the taco theory, which is if you force people to use it without getting their input, without getting tolerant attitudes, working with it initially, it's not going to work. You have to figure out what the rules of the system are, and then you've got to figure out what sort of open tortilla of anyone can do anything in it is, and you've got to mash that together with Cheese Whiz. You've got to make sure that your system has enough good feedback in terms of the cheese that you've got champions that love it, that work with it, and then when it does break, you can go fix it, you can go improve it, and now you get huge buy-in because everybody's part of the process. And so thinking through the cultural implications of how people buy into those new systems, whether it be your clients or whether it be your internal people, becomes critical. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, IoT, augmented reality, and those are all things that you can add to web applications. We're building some cool AI stuff this week. I wish I could talk about it, can't yet, but I will be able to in a few weeks, and we'll show you what that looks like for web applications and taking this stuff to the next level. Ideas to leave you with is there a place where there's a small issue that could be a big issue? Is there a place in your business where you have different people who access information and some people should only access some of it and you're trying to sort of hide it and not really sure who should get what? Is there a place in your business where there's administration issues? If you could have a web application to help manage your business today, what would you do with it? That's all, folks. If you have any questions or looking for more information, if you've asked any through that process, feel free to reach out to Jamie, Troy, myself, or Taylor. We would love to help you in any way possible.